Hello and welcome to the Holographic Podcast. I'm your host, Tony, Tone D, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kyle, the salty dog. How are you, Kyle?
I'm doing okay.
Great. Happy to have you. We have a lot to talk about today, some real heavy shit. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about the way forward and some political and social ideologies. And then stick around. We're going to talk about the Electoral College. And as always, some good 80s movies wisdom. Before we talk about the way forward, which is the future, I want to talk a little bit about time. If you've seen the show, you know that I like to talk about the nature of the universe and hologram theory. So time is a tricky subject. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know everything about the nature of time in our universe, because I think there's a lot as humans that we don't know. I think there's a real big chunk of reality with time and the nature of time and how it moves that we have no clue about. No scientist knows, no human knows. So I don't want to sit here and talk a lot about it, because you do your own research, you do your own thinking about time. But with the future, if we talk about the future, we have to talk about possible futures. And so time as a reality in the nature of the universe is a tricky thing. And so I think there's multiple futures that can happen. So in hologram theory, there's this explicit construct that we create, and time is a big part of that. Time is a big part of the construct that we create. Without time in the universe, our entire existence would fall apart. We use time every second. So it's a big part of our construct. And in the book, The Holographic Universe, by Michael Talbot, he actually he researches a gentleman who did a experiment where he used hypnosis to talk about people's past lives, and they go in the past and in the future. And I don't want to talk a ton about it. I want you to figure it out. If you are interested, read The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot and check this this experiment out. It's and it's been done a couple times. People put different individuals under hypnosis, and then they talk about the past and the future. It's really interesting. So in that book, there's a couple possible futures, and that's exactly what's going on right now. There's a couple possible futures that we can go into. And in my opinion, one possible future is a involuntary, unscientific future. In other words, there's going to be some sort of dictatorship or some sort of heavy regulation pushed on us, where they push science away, and we don't have any sort of good technology. And that's one possible future. The second, or I think there's three possible futures. The second possible future is a voluntary scientific future, where we voluntarily have very good science and technology, and there's a lot of things around us that can make our lives different and better in a technological standpoint. And then future number three is a voluntary unscientific future, which is like when people get back to nature, and they kind of reject modern technology, and they live very simply. So those three possible futures, and that's actually kind of what he talks about in the book, but there's other possible futures as well. So, but those are three basic ones that we can think of. So depending on what we do with ourselves and with our governments and how we move forward, those are our possible futures. So I want to talk about one possible future here, which is the voluntary scientific future, which is kind of what the path we're on now, unless things change quite a bit, which is possible. But in a voluntary scientific future, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of different things that can make our lives better. And one of those is automation. So almost every single job we know of can be automated. There can even be an AI sitting here doing a podcast. I mean, we really don't need to do anything in an automated future. and humans can focus more on art and focus more on making ourselves better and the world around us better. That's possible. In that automation, in that automated future, we either need to not have money, or money needs to be given to us in the form of universal basic income, or UBI. So I think that's a distinct possibility for our society. Kyle, do you agree with UBI, universal basic income?
Yeah, actually, I do. I like the idea of UBI. I don't know. Um, I do. The short answer is I do. But am I allowed to go back for a second?
You're allowed to do whatever you want, young man.
So, I like the idea of a voluntary scientific future very much, and I like the idea of UBI. But I also really like the idea of a voluntary unscientific future
Mm-hmm.
very much.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that the concepts have to live in separate worlds. I
Right.
feel like a hybridized model actually might be the best way forward because, in my experience and in my opinion, the further away that we get from your daily, from the from the daily work, and I don't necessarily mean an occupation work, but I mean the process of our daily lives, whether it's making dinner, buying food, growing food, um, feeding your family, working outside, working on the house, doing things that sort of keep you grounded. I believe that in many ways that is the inspiration for art. Like you were saying, we'll have more time for art if everything's automated. But if everything is automated, we may in fact become uninspired. And then the other thing is, I just feel like it's actually just generally good for the soul to be tied down, to not tied down, to be close to the ground, to have dirt under your fingernails, so to speak. And so I reject the idea of any world where humans give away that privilege, really, because that's what it is. It's not viewed as a privilege, and depending on what kind of work. I mean, if you're a slave, being forced to get dirt under your fingernails is horrible. But what I'm saying is that it's important for humans to stay grounded as we move into the future. And if we let technology get too far ahead of us, I fear that we'll lose something.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I think that there's obviously futures where there's a mix and match of things, and it's impossible to say, oh, every part of, the earth is a large place. There's a lot of different pockets of civilization. So I agree. And you're right. It's hard to say, oh, everyone's going to be like this. It's almost like in the future we think in like a Star Trek future where everyone on the planet is doing the same thing and we're all dressed in the same clothes and we have like this mindset of doing the same thing, but that's not going to be the case. So you're absolutely right on that standpoint. And I think too that um, we can be grounded and we can have a connection with the earth while having technology to help us in so many things. But
Agreed.
but the voluntary unscientific future, I think, would come about if there was a major catalyst. So if there was some major catalyst, like for instance, a major worldwide catastrophe where people rejected science, or even an AI gone rogue where people rejected AI, or people rejected automation. I think those sorts of catalysts is what could prompt a voluntary unscientific future. So that's why that future could happen. But I agree with you that it's totally possible, and the voluntary scientific future, hopefully we would be connected with the ground. It's not like we would give up our farming and things like that, but I think it would make it easier. If you lived on a homestead out in the country and you had this technology that could take care of your power, your wind and your wind and your hydropower, and it could help you to till the soil and that kind of stuff, and then the technology was there, but at the same time you lived close to the ground, like that is a great, that's I agree, that's how it should be.
Yeah, we just have to be careful, because I think ideally, I think what we need is a marriage, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, of the two systems. Now, when I say voluntary unscientific, I don't mean the rejection of science. I don't mean pushing away technology that is genuinely beneficial. Like I said, I just mean to say that it is important for us to keep ourselves in a position where we're not losing some of the things, or we're not moving in a direction that stifles individuality, or in a direction where too much is done for us. You know what I mean?
Well, you know,
Um,
something about our species, something about humans, something about us as individuals. I think it's very difficult for us to be to for many people in many societies to be holistic and to be moderate. So do you think it's even possible for, you know, like if there was a rejection of certain scientific things and people said, no, we have to go live on the land, you know, do you think it's possible that there could be that future where there's a good hybrid of both? Or is it almost like we're destined to be extreme in some manner? We're destined to either be scientific or we're destined to be rejected science, or we're, you know, is that, what's the possibilities there?
I don't really know. All I know is that the pendulum swings both ways. That's the only thing that I know. So it's like,
Oh.
really, it's like, the further you go out to one direction, that's great. But then as you start to get to a state of extreme of extremity or extremism, it sometimes comes swinging back. I mean,
Yeah.
there's other examples. I mean, it took me 3 times to pass statistics in college, but I came away with a pretty thorough understanding of the bell curve. You know what I mean? And the bell curve
Yeah.
is really true. The
Yeah.
further out you go, the less sort of like the less examples of something there are, successful examples. And, sort of the truth lies somewhere in between. I love
Right.
the Chinese idea, the Chinese proverb of the middle ground. I don't know the technical term for it, but the Chinese have always thought that, this is too much, this is too little. Try and tread that middle ground. They're not the only ones, but I'm just saying, for me, a lot of it really, I feel like we need just to be basically critical and analytical to a very high degree, and accept the things that are helpful without being hurtful, which is our big problem, because we have the things that are helpful to some right now but hurtful to many, and we just grab them, and a lot of people suffer, even though some people are doing very well. So I think that it's important to grab onto the things that are helpful and not hurtful, and reject the things that look like maybe think they're advancing, but at what, you have to take a good hard look at the costs of that advancement.
So that brings up a good point, because what you said is extremely valid, but the problem is that not everyone is going to see it that way. And so, or not everyone is going to have maybe I'm going to use the word discipline to do that sort of thing. The discipline to say, okay, I'm going to reject something for the good of myself and my family and my town and my society. Some people are going to say, no, I'm going to be a selfish asshole. So that brings us to our next point on this, which is a government regulation, or the leaders in society. And they're, if if we can't do things ourselves, we need, some people say we don't need, but for the sake of discussion, I'll say, you know, most cultures and societies need need some sort of leadership to give them regulations and rules. And so, this balance, the way forward, I think it's important that we have this discussion, because the way forward, there needs to be more discussions like this about the nature of leadership and the nature of governments, because people are stuck in these things like, oh, it has to be capitalism, it is socialism, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. And that's just not correct, because the way forward is a moderate ground, just exactly what you said. The way forward, there needs to be some sort of bell curve where we're doing different things, and we have a moderate ground. So I think it's totally possible to have two different types of ideologies come together and using the best of them and getting rid of the worst of them. Now that's going to take strong leadership. It's going to take a government to control that. It's going to take a set of people to control that. So, my question is, because I don't know the answer to it, is that possible for us as a society to allow leadership to tell us what to do? When is regulation a good thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I I hate to keep on going back to the same place, but I really do think that it's about striking a balance. So, over the course of my adult life, people have I've said certain things or opined in certain ways, and people have been like, "Oh, you're a libertarian." And I'm like, well, I mean, sort of, in some ways. In some ways, I can be a libertarian. And, but I actually reject libertarianism as the platform stands, like when you read it,
Right.
because they are like in really, really unstructured in the sense that they really, it's almost like Darwinism in a political form. And while I am an optimist and I like people, and I think people a lot of the times are really inherently good, there's also many, many occasions where people are inherently not good, and they won't act in the best interest of the group. They'll act in the best interest of the individual. And that's why I really do favor it. This is a circumstantial thing. I'm not saying I favor a strong, overreaching federal government in all areas. I'm saying I support a strong, overreaching federal government in some areas and a almost non-existent, underreaching, absent federal government in others. And I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. When it comes to, generally speaking, minus some extreme examples, the things you put in your body, like, recreational drugs and the way, those, it's not really up to the government to decide that. I don't think the government should be regulating sexual preferences, or who marries who. I don't think that the government should be regulating abortion issues. I do think that the government should be really strong on regulating corporate policy, environmental policy, and the way we move forward in terms of other aspects of economic policy, like businesses and stuff. Because you can't just have people dumping pollution in the rivers, and you can't trust corporations to not make the most amount of money that they possibly can at any given time, no matter what, even though the person is getting screwed. The person being the people, being the millions of people. So, for me, it's a circumstantial thing. And I say Darwinism in some spots, if you want to go out and get so effed up. I mean, again, I don't even know if I could actually say that, but what I'm saying is, in certain areas, I'm very much pro-regulation. In other areas, I'm very much keep your hands off and stay away, and
Right.
let it be up to the individual.
And that makes sense. And I think one of the problems is people think that it's got to be one way or the other. And I don't understand why that has to be that way. I'm not sure why we've got stuck in this point. And that's a problem for me with libertarianism, because I really like the aspect of individual freedom with libertarianism. But then when it comes to business freedom and kind of a rejection of government stepping in when they need to, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Exactly.
So we can take some parts of it, and then there's some parts of socialism that, when you have a few people controlling everything, and a lot of people get nothing, yes, that's a bad part of socialism. But there are good parts of socialism where you enact more fairness by making sure everyone is taken care of. And there's parts of capitalism that are good, they're where you can make money with hard work and things like that. But there are parts of capitalism that are horrible, where, like we're seeing in our society in late stage capitalism, where there's so many underprivileged people. I mean, 1 in 5 kids in the United States of America has food scarcity, and they might go to bed hungry. So there's obviously issues in late stage capitalism that we have to deal with. So why can't we take let's just use those three ideologies. Why can't we take those three ideologies and get rid of the worst stuff and put the best stuff together? And I'm not sure why we can't, although I kind of know why we can't, which I think the reason is because of power and greed. I think the reason is because the people in charge want to keep their power, and they want to keep all their money, and they want to keep telling other people what to do. So when you get, they say absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is, is it possible for us to, because this is a basic idea of getting rid of the worst and keeping the good and using moderation. I mean, can we even get to a point where the people in charge can recognize that?
I mean, I think we can. I don't think we're anywhere close to it. I think we're actually at this moment sort of well, at least in this country, things seem to be devolving to a certain degree. But just going back a second, I like when you said, oh, why can't we look at this and look at that, and take the best parts and get rid of the worst? That goes back to what we were saying before about just a hard analysis. Like,
right.
Why are we not constantly making hard analytical decisions and deciding? I mean, even if you were to break it down to a really, really cold and calculated numbers game of statistics and numbers, and outlining things and saying, well, if we move forward with these big business practices, this is going to happen and this is going to happen, and what's the better, where are more people going to be helped? I'm not necessarily advocating for that across the board, but like you were saying, there is a lot of power at the top, and capitalism is, in some ways, is great because it rewards hard work and individuality. And if you come up with a great product, why shouldn't you make a lot of money? But should you make it in such a way that even if you have a helpful product, should you make that product in a way that doesn't help others?
Right.
Because it's manufactured with slave labor or low wages or environmental degradation,
right,
et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's where that hard analysis comes in. And I mean, we're of the same mindset. I think that without certain real rules and regulations on even how things happen at the top level, there's basically, it's unchecked, and people are going to make money and they're going to gain power and they're not going to give it up.
Absolutely.
Isn't this what trust busting was all about? Like, we've been through
right.
this.
Absolutely.
100 years ago.
We've been through it. Absolutely. We've been through it.
100 years ago, we did this.
They said, whoa, look at these monopolies. Let's break up these monopolies. And here we are again. It's cyclical.
And Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Forget about the monopoly. It was like the poor immigrants working in, and that's when the FDA came in, food service and cleanliness and all this other stuff. Like, why are we sitting here 100 years later?
We've forgotten about
it. With still the same issues, factory farms.
So
and
that's a good point, because the leadership, it's almost like the leadership has to be different than I don't want to jump on the train like, oh, career politicians and they shouldn't be politicians. I don't want to jump on that train, because you have to be a leader of a large amount of people. You have to be somewhat of a politician. You have to be. So I'm not going to sit here and say that we shouldn't have politicians, but at the same time, there are people who know these things. There are people that have said these things. It's not just scientists, it's writers and all these things. So how do we get these people to be either more into being leaders, or the leaders into being more like them, getting leadership to be more analytical and to be, more constructive, or getting people who are, in those educational fields to be more leaders? Like, I don't know the answer.
I think, it's interesting and we're going to see how it all works out. But I actually think it's happening slowly. And I think that's actually part and parcel of why we're dealing with all the stuff we're dealing with is because those folks in power that are really seeing their grip loosen are starting to panic, and they're doing things that are really, really, amoral, unethical. To try, this is like the last. I don't know if it's the last, but it's a dying breath, or it's a stranglehold. I mean, so I know there's lots of people in this country who hate the Squad. I love the Squad, dude. I want a bunch of brown women in fucking Senate, in the Congress. It's time for a paradigm shift. It's time for some new blood. And we're watching it happen. It's not going to be fast, and it's not going to be easy, but it is actually taking place. And I think that might be contributing to the craziness. You know what I mean? Right. Amongst every other thing, it's part of it, and I'm okay with that. I think
change
it's
is
a
hard.
valuable thing.
Yeah, change is difficult, and a lot of people are seeing they're frightened of it. And I think there's also a giant thing that we're not discussing of what's going on, which is misinformation. Americans are one of the most misinformed people on the planet. So,
oh yeah, being dumb is cool.
That's right.
Seriously.
And people, when you talk about regulation, you talk about when you talk about a government, oftentimes you hear the term nanny state. Well, it's a nanny state. It's a nanny state. And I've said this before in an internet discussion. It's 100% original to me. A nanny state is needed when people act like children. So if people are going to act like children and act like little jerks, that's why you get a nanny state. So I think that if you truly want to be individualistic, and if you truly want to have that sort of libertarian ideal of self-worth and self-individualism, and we call the shots, then you can't act like a child. You can't act in a manner that is harmful to the entire society. So if that's not going to happen, then you have to find a balance, and you need some sort of leadership to step in. And that's then going to cause this change. It's going to cause chaos, because then the people are like, they freak out, and they've been fed misinformation. I mean, there's a lot of lies. I'm just going to straight up say it. There's a lot of lies about things right now.
Yeah. And part of what boggles my mind is that if people are worried about making money, there's so much goddamn money to be made through ethical business decisions now, that it's a foregone conclusion that the world is going to come to a cataclysmic end because of drought and climate change and all that stuff. I cannot understand why for the last 40 years, the big companies haven't said, okay, well, let's throw some money into this and everybody will be our slaves, only instead of wrecking the planet, we'll be saving it. Like, what are these people thinking?
They're not thinking, and they don't have the right leadership, because you're absolutely right. They could be making more. It's with renewable energy. It's a perfect example. It's a giant market that could make tons of jobs and tons of money for a lot of people, but they're grasping at this fossil fuel thing, and I'm not sure why, because you're absolutely right. They can make a lot of money the other way. So it's like the leadership is so uninspired. They're so misinformed. They're so whatever word you want to use. It's not working. So that's why we need some sort of whatever you want to call it, a council of elders or something to fucking step in and do it, because the free market, the market is not doing it. The market is not doing its job of what it should. So you need the Squad to step in and mix things up.
And in that future too, if they were doing a Green New Deal and everybody was all into this other stuff, and technology wasn't as electric stuff wasn't as powerful as gas, you know what I mean, or oil, save all the oil for the military, man. I'm pro strong military. We gotta have that shit, man. I like tanks. I like helicopters. I like the F-35. Save the gas for those guys. Aviation fuel for the United States forces. Electric power for the nimbly bimbly little fucking go-karts of everybody else. Okay?
And for the record, I'm not strong military. That's where Kyle and I might disagree a little bit. I think that we should reduce our military by about 99%. And guess what?
I think we should reduce our military.
We're gonna be fine.
I think we should reduce our military, not by 99%, but no, we're going to keep power at the top, here where it belongs, at the top.
This is an interesting discussion, but I don't want to get into it because we're running out of time. Okay, just calm down, Kyle. Kyle is going crazy now. He wants to grab his guns. So, but that's an interesting dichotomy because, with Kyle and with myself too, we can have different opinions about different things and we don't fit into one ideology. You can think, I almost equate it sometimes when I see people who are stuck in a political ideology like it's their team. Oh man, I have to stick with this political ideology because that's my team and I got to stick with my team. And if I don't, what's the word when you're all right, let's move on because I can't think of this particular word.
Disloyal, unloyal.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Exactly. When you're unloyal, they go, I don't want to stick with my political ideology because I'm unloyal. It's not how politics works. That's not how the future is going to move forward. You can't move forward when you stick with a political ideology because that's your team.
Life isn't black and white.
Right. Exactly. And neither is political ideologies are, but neither is reality. So since reality is not black and white, well, how can you have a political ideology that is black and white? How can you stick with that team? So I think that's a disservice to humanity. When you won't change your political ideology because it's your team, I think that's a disservice to humanity. We're allowed to change.
And I know we're moving on, but just as an example for me personally, I'm gonna make this tiny and tiny. I do like guns. I have guns, but if the federal government said tomorrow that we are imposing some new rules, and they're not going to say we're taking them all away, but if they said impose some new rules, I'd be all for it. Because you know what? I don't use my guns and I don't need my guns. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not, I have hunting rifles.
You can change.
I have hunting rifles. As long as I have one hunting rifle, why do I need more than that? I don't. You know what I mean? So
I know exactly what you mean.
That's an example of being somewhat flexible or somewhat open to something. Like, I don't understand it.
And that's, I think that you're open to that because of the good of society. So
because of the bad things that are happening because of widespread firearm use. I mean, I can recognize it. I'm not blind to it. It's a horror.
Right. Absolutely. Well, what if they said, okay, you have to get rid of all your guns. We're going to melt them down. Would you give them up?
Take them. I don't care. I got a bow.
Boom.
Yeah.
So let's end on saying that the way forward is to be flexible and to look at different ideologies, not be stuck in one ideology, and to look at the good of society and keep our individualism, keep our individual thoughts and freedoms, but maintain certain amount of regulation and a certain amount of structure that might entail giving up a few things for the good of society. I think that's the way forward. I think it's a fairly okay thing to do.
Sounds like we just solved the problem.
Boom. All right. Well, speaking of a problem, we're going to move on to our next topic, which is the Electoral College. And I want to talk about the Electoral College because it's October of 2020 right now, and there's an election in a few days. And people always say, Tony, why did you talk about the Electoral College after the election? Why don't you talk about the Electoral College before the election? Well, I'm going on record and I'm going to talk about it before the election, and then we'll see what happens. So I want to talk about um, the where the electoral college came from, and the just kind of a little bit of history of it. I'll try and be as brief as possible, but there's a lot going on there. My expertise is in American history in school and higher education. That was my major. I did a lot of research, and just so a lot of people know, and my opinion, as far as the internet goes, I didn't do any internet research about this. Zero. All my research about the Electoral College was from libraries and was from books and was from professors. I've done zero research on the Electoral College on the internet. So I think that you can go on the internet and find any article about an opinion that you want, and it doesn't make it factual. It doesn't make it real. Right now, there's a lot of weird things. The internet is monetized. The internet is a group of corporations. And so the internet's good if you want to go and find what height a mountain is, but the internet isn't as good if you want to find a lot of historical accuracy. You got to do the time. You got to put in the time. You got to go to a library. You have to speak to people who have studied it their whole lives. So that being said, the Electoral College came about, the framers, when they were making the Constitution, the president, having a president was actually not the first thing they thought of. They came about with Congress and the Senate and the courts, and then they were like, oh, I guess we need to have a president to kind of make a trifecta and to round it out. So electing the president was kind of a tricky thing, and in my opinion, there's three reasons why the Electoral College came about. Reason number one was the slave reason, the 3/5 compromise. So the southern states, their slaves, their African-American slaves, were considered 3/5 of a person, and so they got more electoral votes that way. The second reason was to take power away from the average person. Remember, I've said it before, that the society at the time was a different society. They had a very distinct hierarchy, and they had a very a distinct social structure. So there's aristocracy and people with money and people with power, and then people in the middle and people on the bottom, and that was just the way of life at that time. There was, if you walked down the street and you were a founding father and you had money, you didn't go talk with a poor person. You didn't invite them to your home, or you didn't even go in a restaurant and have dinner with them. And that's completely different now. You can be a millionaire and you can walk into a restaurant and have dinner right next to someone who's got nothing. That didn't happen then. That wasn't the case. It was way different. Society was very different. So what the Electoral College did was it actually allowed the framers to give the power, give the votes to this group of electors, which were higher status than the average person. And that was the way they thought. It wasn't bad. It wasn't different. There was just a social hierarchy. So that was reason number two, take the power away from the average person. But the main reason, that 100% main reason that I found in reading quotes and in talking to professors, was much more simpler reason, which was, at the time in the late 1700s, there was no communication. They didn't have cell phones, they didn't have phones, they didn't have anything. All they had was horses and buggies and your feet. So if you had a state that that did voting, and then you needed to hear about it, you're not going to hear about it for weeks until they got that information somewhere. So the idea that they came up with was to make these electors to gather the information, go to one place, and then elect the president. And so it was a very simple reason at first why they came up with it, to create this Electoral College, because communication was horrible back then, and they wanted to reduce chaos. And then on top of that, the southern states went, yeah, this will give us more power. We like this idea. And they said, okay, that's a good compromise. You get more power. And they said, oh, and this is going to work good because it takes the power away from the average person. Those are the three reasons why the Electoral College was created. Now, you can find some internet article that contradicts me. And you know what? I don't care, because the internet article, in my opinion, is full of shit. Go talk to some professors and they're going to tell you a similar thing, or they might have, you know, a slightly different idea, but this is historically what went on. So then at first, they left it up to the states. The states were allowed to do different things. So winner take all from the states actually didn't happen at first. When it took about 40 or 50 years for the states to all adopt winner take all, which means that when the states voted, only one person from that state was only one party from that state got all the votes. So that wasn't explicit in the Constitution. It was up to the states. So it still is up to the states about how they do that. Then there's some bunch of stuff that went down. Let's fast forward all the way to the 1970s. In the 1970s, the early 70s, there was actually a big push to abolish the Electoral College. It was because of a third party, this guy, Wallace, I believe, who was a segregationist. He was taking power away from Nixon, and he was going to take a bunch of electoral votes in the South. And he said, "Hey, Nixon, you want these electoral votes? You gotta compromise with me." And so Nixon's party at the time, they were like, "Oh man, he's using the Electoral College against us." And then the other party was like, "Well, this is obviously messed up." And there was a giant national push to eliminate the Electoral College. And it was really close to happening. They actually passed a bill. Actually, I don't think it was passed in the House. I think it was in the Senate. There was a bill to eliminate the Electoral College. And there was bipartisan support. Both parties were like, "Yeah, let's do it." And guess what happened? The southern states filibustered it. A couple dudes from the South said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, this is going to take our power away. And then the South isn't going to have as much voice. And we don't like this." So they filibustered it and they killed it. They killed it in the Senate, even though there was national support, bipartisan support. So again, the segregationist South again had this hand in the Electoral College. Now you fast forward again to modern times, to the last 15, 20 years. One party has lost the popular vote and gained the presidency a few times, and we're possibly in that position again. And so let's be specific. The Democrats have won the popular vote a few times in the last 30 years, won the popular vote, but lost the presidency. And so the Republicans now say, "Wow, that's a great thing for us." And so if you're a Republican and you say, "Well, why would I want to eliminate the Electoral College?" I'll tell you what, it's going to shit on you too soon. And I just found out why. I was listening to an analyst who's talking about Texas. In Texas, in maybe not this year, but next presidential cycle, 2024, and possibly the one after that, it's probably going blue. If you look at how Texas is moving from red to blue, just because of population, it's going to go to blue. That means if Texas goes blue, there's almost zero possibility that a Republican could ever win the presidency again, because both coasts have a bunch of electoral votes. And if Texas goes blue, there's going to be no chance for a Republican to get in through the Electoral College. So if you're a Republican and you think this is a good thing for you, you're wrong. It's going to shit on you soon as well. It's very bad for both parties. And it also makes it so one person has a stronger vote than another person. So in California, the population is almost 40 million. In Wyoming, the population is only about 600,000, I believe. But in Wyoming, they have 3 electoral votes, and in California, they have 50 something. I can't remember exactly. That means that an individual in Wyoming, their vote is 2.5 times more powerful than someone in California. So it makes one person's vote more powerful.
Bullshit.
And then on top of that, it eliminates people's votes. So in California, you have 40 million people, and if it goes blue, how many millions of Republicans, their vote is then negated? Doesn't count at all. Way more millions of Republicans in California, their votes don't count than any Republican in Wyoming. So that's the extreme. But the rest of the states are somewhere in between. So those are the facts. That's the history that I know it. And it just shows that the Electoral College is crap. The Electoral College is shit, and it's bad for both parties. It might be good for one party right now, but it's not going to be good for that party soon. So it obviously has to go. Kyle, do you think the Electoral College has to go?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I don't have all that much to add to that litany, which is great because I just learned some stuff myself. But, you know, having a system that gives victory to the second place finisher is it's a flawed system.
Flawed.
Okay, so there's that's just the number one. I can't grok on that. You know, my brain doesn't work that way. If somebody crosses the finish line first, they should get the victory. With the EC, you've got a candidate that actually crosses the finish line first, but the victory goes to the person who's coming in second in some cases. And that system is definitely flawed. I know that a popular argument, and this is a very general idea, people are like, well, what do you want? New York and California deciding the outcome for the entire nation? No, I don't want New York and California deciding the outcome. I want the people who happen to live in New York and California to decide the outcome. End of story. And like Tony said, you know, with a system that sort of makes some votes carry a certain much more weight than another system than other votes, that is a flawed system. The only other thing I could add to that is that while I do value the ideas or the ideology of constitutionalists, which are, you know, the idea being very rigid to the way that the Constitution was written, I don't think it's realistic, and I also don't think that it is in and of itself constitutional. That is why we have amendments, and that is why things can change based on the vote. I mean, anybody that thinks that a system of rules and regulations that was written, as Tony has so often told us, times were different, a system of rules and regulations that was written in 1776 or somewhere around then.
I think it was ratified in 82. So 76 was the Declaration of Independence. They said, we're independent, but the Constitution actually wasn't ratified till 82.
It's a long fucking time ago, folks. It's a long fucking time ago, folks.
A long fucking time ago.
So the point is that, you know, we have to be open-minded, and this lends itself very much to our previous conversation. Doing a hard analysis of things is going to take us in the right direction. So no, I don't want urbanites in Los Angeles and New York deciding what is best for the country as a whole. But, you know, the thing about it is it's got to be one person, one vote. That's the end of the story. And if somebody from Wyoming feels like the walls are closing in and their way of life is going to be decided by a Yankee, that's legitimate. But unfortunately, you have to figure out a way to convince the rest of the country that your open space and your way of living is worth holding on to. And if it's I'm sorry, it's not always going to work out. I'm not saying I want to see development in Wyoming. I'm not saying that I want to see the way of life in Wyoming change. I love the American cowboy. I like bison. I like the Bighorn Mountains. I like snow. I like skiing. I like hot springs. I like all that stuff. But when it comes to voting, one person in this country equals one vote in this country. And if Hillary Clinton won the vote by 3 million, then she should be the president. And there are other examples prior to that. It's not that New York and California are deciding, it's that people, regardless of where they are around the country, on the perimeter or in the interior, people are deciding. Geography is second. And that's a lot for me to say because I'm a geographer and geography always comes first for me. But in this case, geography is a secondary measure. The
Right.
most important measure is getting more people to vote and listening to the votes themselves.
And like I said, there's there's so many Republicans, or there's so, let me just say it factually, there's so many different parties in the in the um in California and New York. So thinking that California and New York are just going to automatically decide things because they've gone one way in the Electoral College is not correct, because there's a lot of both parties in those two states on the side. It's just that because of the Electoral College, it seems like it only goes one way. But
Well, more
again,
parties
that's
would be a good thing too, by the way.
right. Absolutely. So
But more parties is
right.
exactly what we need.
So that could help with that. If you eliminated the Electoral College and it wasn't winner take all to one party, then people might say, oh, I could vote third party. But let me give an analogy of if, when people say like, oh, those high populated states are just going to decide, which isn't the case. But there's a good analogy to think about it. So let's say you have a large room, a party, and a bunch of people are standing on one side and a bunch of people are standing in one side, and then not as many people are standing in the middle. And someone comes in, the owner of the house, and they say, hey, who wants pizza? Who wants burgers? We got to decide, pizza or burgers. Let's have a vote. And then everyone decides, most people decide for pizza. But the people in the middle want the burgers. And the guy says, well, according to the house rules, you people in the middle, your vote's going to count a little bit more than the people on the side, so we're getting burgers. I guarantee you, no matter what political party you're from, no matter what ideology you have, you're going to think that was fucked up. You're going to say, hey, whoa, 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 this is a fucked up party. House rules. We just voted for pizza and you're getting us burgers because this jackass in the middle, his vote's going to count more than me? Guess what? That's exactly how the Electoral College is right now.
That's
Literally
funny.
exactly what's going on. That's
Mhm.
and so if you have a political ideology that's telling you that that's good, maybe you should rethink your political ideology. That's ridiculous. It doesn't matter where you're standing in the room. If you want a fair system, it should be one person, one vote.
I like that.
Boom.
I like that. That's a
Okay.
good analogy.
So
It doesn't matter where you're standing in the room. One
shouldn't matter.
person, one vote.
We're all Americans. It shouldn't matter where you're standing in America. It should be one person, one vote. Tally the votes. That's who the winner is.
And I most certainly agree.
Boom. So okay, let's move on, because we've done it. We've hit it. I went on record with the Electoral College. I put it down, and so let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
Whew. All right, that was a lot. But I spit it out. So now let's go. Let's do some 80s movies wisdom. If you've made it this far, thank you. We love you. Time for 80s movies wisdom. Yeah, you're the people. Yeah. So
Love sign. It's the love sign.
Kyle's giving the love sign. 80s movies wisdom. So we've done 80s movies wisdom on Conan the Barbarian, and then last week we did Back to the Future because I wanted to get away from Arnold Schwarzenegger. But guess what? We're back to Arnold. We're back to Arnold. We're gonna do Predator now. Just real quick.
Wait, did Predator actually come out in the 80s or was it a 90s movie? Just out of curiosity.
Predator's got to be 80s, man. That's an old movie.
Teetering.
No,
Teetering on the brink.
Predator's got to be 80s.
If
All
it
right,
is, 89.
All right, 89. That's still in the fucking 80s. Whatever.
Maybe. I only have but one device. I can't. My bandwidth is 0.05 megabytes, so I can't check my phone.
So just a quick word on Arnold. Obviously, a lot of great 80s movies had Arnold in them. Now Arnold, when I was a kid, you're like, wow, Arnold is so cool. And then he got into politics, and I was like, whoa, what the hell is this guy doing in politics? I didn't like his politics. He's kind of a jackass, and he did some weird shit. And he had some affair, and everyone was like, Arnold sucks. But guess what? Lately, Arnold has been saying some cool shit. Arnold's saying he's trying to end gerrymandering. He's been promoting veganism and eating healthy. He's really into the Special Olympics and pushing special athletes and all sorts of this stuff that is really helpful for a lot of people. So
he's anti-asshole.
He's anti-asshole. So a lot of the stuff that you can say about how Arnold was a shit person, I have been hearing a lot of good things and seeing a lot of good things about Arnold. So that's
Agreed.
why I'm kind of bringing Arnold back to the forefront thank you, Arnold, for being cool with a lot of the stuff you're saying. I appreciate it. And so I'm going to make fun of you a little bit here with your accent. So Kyle actually informed me that this line from Predator is his favorite line. So
One
Kyle,
of my favorites.
What's that?
One of my favorites.
One of his favorites. So in the beginning of Predator, Dutch, Arnold plays Dutch. He shows up to this special jungle forces mission, and he meets I think it's Carl Weathers. It was Dylan, and so Arnold and Dylan and Dutch, Arnold and Carl Weathers, they clasp hands. He goes, Dylan, how are you? And they clasp hands. What does he say? He says, Dylan. What does he say about Dylan?
He says, Dylan, you son of a bitch.
How are you?
He doesn't actually say how are you.
He doesn't say how are you?
No.
All right. So they're like arm wrestling in the air.
They're arm wrestling in the air.
Arm wrestling in the air.
Locked in.
And Arnold's kicking his ass. And he goes, what's the matter, Dylan? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils? Boom. And that's it. That's the line. That's the wisdom. The wisdom is, if you're having problems, put down your fucking pencil, step back from your desk, step away from your computer or phone or whatever, get outside, get closer to the earth, just like Kyle was saying. So important. Be grounded. Don't let the CIA get you pushing too many pencils. And that's it. That's the wisdom. Simple.
That's it. I mean, it goes right in with the themes that we're it's got to be, we have these recurring themes. But this folds right into it. It's true. You get some dirt under your fingernails. You know what I mean? Don't lose sight of the things that make you human.
Do you want to say the line, Kyle?
What, the same line you just said?
Yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Dylan, you son of a bitch. What's the matter, Dylan? CIA got you pushing too many pencils?
Brilliant. It's so much fun to say. And
it's a valuable lesson. It really is. And you know what? In reality, okay, so winter is coming upon us, but let's just take this a few months in advance. You don't have to live a back to the earth life. If you want to get some dirt under your fingernails, you can do it right in your own windowsill by having a couple of herbs growing in a hanging pot. You can do it by going out and raking the front. Let's say you've got a 3x5 square of green or dirt space in between the sidewalk where you live. If you live in someplace urban or very urban or suburban, and you don't have a yard. Even that simple act can bring you right down to where you were supposed to be. And because Tony and I are pro-science and we're for the, what are we, pro-science reality of?
Voluntary scientific?
Voluntary science, reality of prolific.
Something like that, whatever.
Science has told us that even touching dirt on a daily basis or a weekly basis or some sort of a rotational basis actually releases chemicals in your brain which make you happier. So,
absolutely.
It is good to get your hands dirty.
Yep.
And when I say dirt, I mean earth. It is actually scientifically proven that is, it's a chemical thing. So, it can't be denied.
Absolutely.
It's important.
And you can just, put down, like I said, put down your devices, grab a book, do a little stretching, and try and get some earth. There's a lot of different things. If you're stuck, if you don't have access to that, again, just put down your devices and read a book. And so there's different things you can do, and we can only do as much as we can do individually. But
every bit counts, though.
Every bit counts. Don't let the CIA push too many pencils on you or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's all we got for today.
Good show, Tony.
Show. Kyle, it was a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And this was the Holographic Podcast, signing off.